Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Cancer is an Inflammatory Disease. I am Dr. Barbara Malkas, Board President for Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition is dedicated to preventing environmental causes of breast cancer through community education, research advocacy, and changes to public policy. I am pleased to welcome today's guest, Dr. Linda Malkas. Yes, she is my sister. Dr. Linda Malkas is the Associate Chair and a Professor in the Department of Molecular and Cell Biology at the Beckman Research Institute of City of Hope, where she co-founded and continues to co-lead the Molecular Oncology Program since 2011. Previously, she was a professor of medicine at the Indiana University School of Medicine, where she co-founded and co-led the Indiana University Simon Cancer Center's Breast Cancer Research Program and established the Signature Center for Breast Cancer Research. Dr. Malkas has published over 75 peer-reviewed articles, presented at numerous national and international scientific meetings, and served on various NIH and Department of Defense grant review study sections. She is a member of the editorial boards for several journals, including Cancer Research and Cancer Prevention Research, and has been on the Department of Defense Ovarian Cancer Research Program Integration Panel since 2011. Additionally, she serves as an external advisor for multiple cancer centers, holds over 23 US and international patents, and has received numerous awards throughout her career. Her major research focus is the relationship between DNA replication and cancer, and her laboratory's recent work has opened opportunities to develop selective therapeutic agents that inhibit proteins uniquely expressed by cancer cells. Dr. Malkas, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Barb. How are you?
I'm good. So instead of our usual webinar format, Dr. Malkas, my sister, is joining me for a conversation on cancer as an inflammatory disease. We will be discussing this topic during our program in an interview format, and we invite you to join the conversation by using the question feature in the GoToWebinar panel. Please feel free to post your questions throughout the interview, and I will make sure to include your questions over the course of the next hour. So Dr. Malkas, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I noticed you gloss over the idea that you've won some awards. You recently were in Rome receiving a very prestigious award from Pope Francis, His late Holiness, for your cancer work. So tell us about your experiences, your work, in particular your research in breast cancer around diagnosis and specifically treatment.
Sure. So, one, I want to say hi to everybody, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to participate in this webinar today. It's quite exciting. I was looking forward to it. And if you hear an occasional barking dog, I apologize. I have 6 dogs. All right. But anyway, so yeah, so I've had a career. I was a basic scientist for a long time, as you mentioned in the introduction, in the areas of DNA replication, repair, and genomic instability. And you know, that lies at the heart of all cancers, including breast cancer, genomic instability, actually all disease. I just actually gave a lecture on Monday, and I talked about, you know, if you look at the heart of every disease, it's due to a change in DNA. So my research work, my bench research work, was all in the area of, as I said, you know, DNA, all processes DNA, and through that work, and I started primarily in breast cancer, looking at the changes in DNA replication and repair between malignant and non-malignant breast cells. And we found that the DNA replication process was altered in breast cancer cells, in that every time a breast cancer cell would divide, so every time so some magic, some science magic here. So, and to also hallmark or to tell you just how incredibly complicated we are as a molecular machine. So if you take out the DNA of one nucleus of one human cell, and you stretch it out, this is one nucleus, one human cell, it goes out 3 feet. So every time a human cell has to divide, every time as an example, our gut is turned over every 2-3 days, or the whole lining, 2-3 days is an enormous amount of cell proliferation. And every time the mother cell has to divide, she has to make a whole new 3 feet of DNA to give to her new two daughter cells, to the 2 daughter cells. But in cancer cells, the DNA replication process becomes error prone. So you are constantly sprinkling some changed nucleotide bases every time you divide. So technically, the 2 daughter cells don't exactly match that of the mother. So you have to think of cancer as a very dynamic disease. We tend to think of it as highly proliferative, but it's also a genetically dynamic disease as well, and that leads to problems in terms of tumor heterogeneity, and all that kind of stuff. Does that kind of give you a background with that? But anyway, so when I found that there were changes between the DNA replication complex between normal and human cells in breast cancer, this is where I started all my work. We actually started to look through the DNA replication machinery for proteins that were altered in cancer cells versus normal cells. And we found one, and I love telling this name because everybody goes, what? Proliferating cell nuclear antigen, or PCNA. Just don't worry about it. And we found that protein was altered in cancer cells, in breast cancer cells. That's where it was first found. And it turns out to be a hallmark of all cancer cells. All cancer cells contain this altered form of this protein, PCNA. And it's due to the changes in what they call post-translational modification, or how the protein is modified. And when we identified on the domain of that protein what was different, which the address on the protein that was different, we actually developed a brand new therapeutic small molecule drug against this form of this protein. Now, this protein's only in cancer cells and not in normal cells. So this drug is not toxic, actually. It kills the cancer cells, leaves normal cells alone. And we took it all the way from my bench all the way to literally now the bedside. It's in phase 1 clinical trials here at City of Hope. We're doing a solid tumor trial right now. We've just been approved also by the FDA to start a phase 1 clinical trial now for leukemia AML. And I'm not supposed to talk too much about the result. They frown on that, talk about the results, but we're very encouraged. And as we had proposed, the drug does show essentially no toxicity for patients, and which is a real joy for me. That was I would love to see a much better quality of life for patients. So, creating a therapeutic that really just targets the cancer cells and leaves normal cells alone, and actually see it, not just something in my head, but actually goes into the clinic, is quite exciting and quite lovely for me anyway.
So Dr. Malkas, it sounds to me like this is groundbreaking work on the treatment of cancers. And we are an organization that really wants to empower individuals through education, research, and advocacy to think about how do we prevent cancers, right? So there is definitely, we need those early diagnosis, we know saves lives. Treatment, we know saves lives, and certainly a treatment that could improve the quality of life for someone experiencing cancer is very important. But you had presented at a webinar last year, and it was at the very end when we were answering some questions that you made the statement that cancer is an inflammatory disease. And that really led to us wanting to have this conversation and really talking about how can we think about improving the quality of life for those of us who have had experienced a cancer diagnosis, but also how can we prevent cancer from occurring? And when you said cancer is an inflammatory disease, that was very for me personally, something very abrupt in thinking about how I live my life and maintain my health. And so why do you consider breast cancer an inflammatory disease?
Well, there's so much work that has gone into cancer, breast cancer, as a truly inflammatory, at its heart. So they have something called the hallmarks of cancer. They made like a dial, it's a genetic. What are the hallmarks? If you look, at cancer, what are its characteristics? What is its features? What are its hallmarks? So genetic damage, continued proliferation. They have like all these, but one of the hallmarks is actually inflammation. And so when you have cancer itself, there's a lot of indicators for an active inflammatory response. So you have a lot of infiltration of the immune response, okay? But so there's been a lot of people have looked at cancer as an inflammatory disease from a variety of approaches. There's the molecular approach, what's different, what molecules are different, between normal and malignant cells. What's the DNA damage? How is DNA changed? But, there's been just visualization. I mean, pathologists can look at normal breast and diseased breast, and there are very significant changes. And then you can overlayer this. They've done more studies now with women who are more at risk for cancer, and there are some features of, and I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But when you look at the breast of women who are at higher risk for breast cancer, even though they do not have frank disease, their breasts don't look like totally like normal tissue. There are markers for inflammation. So, so there are risk factors. I mean, some are genetic. Some people have a genetic predisposition, but I do want to tell everybody, we're not at the, there are people who have what they call, BRCA mutations, and, or the Angelina Jolie mutations, that, what that is, yes, you do carry a genetic marker for an increased risk for breast and ovarian cancer. But the thing is, it doesn't say that you, even though you're carrying it, you necessarily will get it. There are people walking around with BRCA mutations that never get the disease. So, and I think you and your organization are really well aware that it's almost a dance between you as a molecular being and your environment. So risks for women, things that promote inflammation, obesity, is a high risk. You may look at the adipose tissue of breast in women who are carrying weight. Their adipose tissue does look somewhat different than that of a more normally weighted person. So there's genetic risk, there's physiological risk, there are nutritional risks. And this goes to your wanting, how can we prevent disease or have a greater chance of preventing disease? Diet is huge. I mean, the literature, I actually went through and started to look at what's new. And probably one of the biggest things that a person can do for themselves, and I'm going to start because I was just reading it last night, was actually how diet is so very, very important. What we're taking in, food is chemicals, or whatever, that is a chemical pool, and so, and I love carbs. Okay, you, Barbara, you're my sister. We were raised on mashed potatoes, right? We were raised bread and mashed potatoes. That was our basis of our food pyramid. Yeah, right? That was the basis of our food pyramid.
Disposition for potatoes. Yeah.
Right. So, but sugars, people say it all the time. Seed oils are inflammatory. So things, probably some of the biggest things, everybody says it, but the data is really getting strong here in terms of diet and physical movement, a sedentary lifestyle. And if you think about it, I was thinking about it last night and I said, well, what the sedentary lifestyle, just, well, you're not moving. You need to move that lymph system around. That lymph system is clearing out dead cells, So apparently, now something else I was reading, and it's growing up. So, if you don't move your dead cells out, they kind of start disintegrating and they can throw off all kinds of gunky, I wouldn't call them toxins, but things that can also promote inflammation. So things that people tell us all the time, are what we take in for food, is huge. It's probably a really huge factor. Exercise, moving around, watching your weight. I know all the things we don't want to do, but sleep is huge, very huge, because when you don't sleep enough, you throw your hormones. Once your hormones get out of balance, you're just out of balance. And these are things that you can actually measure inflammatory response. People are doing this. If you don't get enough sleep, you have these hormones, cortisol and others, that go up. And when you're chronically like that, you are stressing your body. One of the things, when early on, when I was looking at this funny form of protein, PCNA, and I was trying to understand, what is going on in these cancer cells. And when you look at cancer cells themselves, they always have, as I kind of stated earlier, they have this chronic DNA damage going on. We call it replication stress. And so that's at the cellular level. We're one big biological, beautiful biological machine. And so much between our environment, you know, what we take in, what we're exposed to, and then also, you know, there's an all growing literature of just your mind having in your, you know, this sounds woo-woo, you know, for somebody who's at the bench, it sounds woo-woo, but it's really, I mean, the data is there that your mental wellness can also significantly affect you. I mean, if you are under, you know, you sleep deprived, you're not eating well, you're having issues in your life, you are putting a tremendous amount of stress on your body, and your body is trying to deal with that. So actually is promoting what you would call, and it's trying to, it's like a fight, because it's trying to help you, but it's also promoting inflammation at the same time, because it's actually trying to help you. So we are these incredible, and I'm talking, but you know, we're only just figuring out how all of this works. You know, you know, like even my area of DNA replication, you look at a textbook and it sounds like, oh, everything's no, it's not. You know, I would say that I'm surprised. You know, when all is said and done, I think we probably only know 1% of what we are and how to handle ourselves. You know, we don't come with a manual, but there are definitely things that we can do. And the literature is very strong on this now, that we can actually do. You know, one of the things I was thinking for today's podcast is my suggestion, and I'm not an MD, okay, but it's like I'm a girlfriend, okay. I'm going to give you a suggestion. I'm going to give a suggestion, and you know, one of the other things that they find, and it's important. This is for not just cancer risk, but you know, all kinds of disease risk. Is that, you know, when you have your annual physical, that you actually have a full blood workup, total workup, not just, you know, like, you know, big, but actually do a big nutritional and workup. You know, have a you know, where they measure all your vitamin levels and your mineral level. You know, have them do the entire panel. A lot of people, a lot of Americans are running around, they're very vitamin D deficient. And they're not taking vitamin D. Actually, in some, they're doing studies now to actually add vitamin D into therapeutic regimen. That's how important vitamin D is.
Am I correct that vitamin D has been linked with certain forms of deficiency, has been linked with certain forms of cancers, for example, skin cancer?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things is, you know, everybody was worried about getting skin cancer, so they slather on, but so now they don't get any vitamin D. Okay, sun gives us but they say half hour a day is enough to give you what you need for vitamin D. So people are very vitamin D deficient, and at the same time, when you take vitamin D, you should be taking vitamin K2 at the same time to make it work well as zinc. Those three go together. Also magnesium, zinc, vitamin D, vitamin K2. But my suggestion is that everyone really have a really good panel looking at your levels of cortisol, that's your stress hormone, look at your vitamin levels, because a lot of people are very deficient. So they, you know, even for, you know, for men, you know, selenium, which is supposed to help prevent prostate cancer, that you know, we used to get a lot of these things out of our foods. It used to be, you know, you would get it out of the ground, you know, but we apparently have farmed so much that we don't quite have the nutrients in the soil the way we used to. So a lot of our food does not provide us with the nutrition that you know, our forebears used to get.
Dr. Malkas, we have
There's
a
a lot.
couple of questions coming in.
Good.
So
Okay.
I want to interrupt you to say we have
No,
a question.
please. I don't know.
No, that's my job. Can you define exactly what inflammation means? For example, what is happening to cells when there is inflammation occurring?
Okay, so there's two ways to look at inflammation. There's the internal cellular inflammation, you know, and like I've mentioned that already, DNA replication stress. So when you have like internal cellular, inside the cell stress, so the way you could look at that, measure that, is actually they're running faster. You know, they're running faster. So in fact, when they do that, they're metabolizing faster. So they change their environment from a more alkaline or neutral base to a more acidic base. So you know, they become more acidic. And when they become more acidic, the internal cell becomes more acidic. It changes a plethora of cellular processes. And then outside of it, so that's inside. You got a little factory in there, just, you know, running at all kinds of speeds and changing its charges, you know, its intercellular charges, and that's by itself is pretty crazy. But then outside of it, when you look at what is inflammation, a lot of the markers for inflammation are actually your immune markers. There are some other biomarkers for stress markers, but a lot of inflammation, you think of immune infiltration, immune system. You know, every day, I don't want to scare everybody, but you know, we are all cancer survivors. Every single day, we make at least 8 funky cancer cells, technically, or aberrant cells. And our immune system is constantly going around and taking them out. So our immune systems are a good thing. But sometimes if we are out of balance, we are out of stress. Okay, so technically we're fighting cancer every day. All right. When we are out of balance, the immune system, who is hunting every second.
So is it safe to say that the more inflammation due to diet, maybe lack of exercise, metabolic changes, stress, environmental factors, environmental exposures, the higher the inflammation, the greater the impact on our immune system? So that once the immune system is not responding as effectively due to this inflammatory condition caused by other dispositions and factors, that's the imbalance.
That's the whole thing. Yeah, that you got. Thank you. That actually is the whole story in a nutshell.
So another
there's a
question
lot
we
of support for this.
Another question that we have, you've already touched on, and yes, we really are sisters. We're biological sisters. And the question is, you know, you've touched on this already around supplements. And there's some, you know, there's a view about supplements, right? Like on one hand, you've already talked about how if we are deficient in certain nutrients, vitamins, minerals, that maybe a supplement could be helpful. But then there's that dispute about the quality of those nutrients versus getting them through natural sources in our diet. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, the supplement industry, as I'll say it, is not really regulated as well as, other in, so, you can go, and be thinking, well, you go into a pharmacy, or you go into Whole Foods or something. Maybe I'm not supposed to mention Whole Foods, but go into and you'll see, like, 60 varieties of vitamin D, right? And and you'll see a variety of prices across the board. But they're not all the same. Hey, one of the things here, this is a side note, guys. Okay, now I'm getting, okay, this is a side note. So I learned something while I was making my drug. Okay, I learned a lot of this things about stuff when I was learning, as I was developing the new anti-cancer drug, because it's an oral drug and people take it twice a day. And I learned about formulation big time, because I couldn't just put powder in somebody's mouth, because it would never survive, getting to your stomach and going through your liver and everything like that. So I learned that the best ways to take drugs, that they become more available, or even, and this is for supplements, okay? But I learned it for drugs, but the same thing, and this is the way I take all my vitamins now, is that you should take them in the soft gel form. Soft gels make the contents that that are inside the soft gel more available to the body. So like a hard tablet, you may only get a quarter of what you think you're getting.
Interesting.
So yeah. So, and I never knew that. It was only when I was learning to make the drug, I was like, oh my gosh. So now I'm a soft gel girl. Now, where were we, Barbara? So we were talking about, I'm sorry.
Supplements and whether or not.
So yeah, so if you can, seriously, real food is like the best. But I'm going to say one thing though. If I have to say that Americans are so vitamin deficient. They are so vitamin deficient. The vitamin D, we are. I think it's some statistics is like 60% of Americans are vitamin D deficient. That is like that's horrendous actually, and because it does have very cancer protective ability. Okay, as long as you take it with K2, you need the K2. You just can't take vitamin D by itself. And people don't tell you that. They don't tell you that. So you need them to. So I would say that supplements, if you're taking them, you've got to make sure they're really, really good quality supplement. Some supplements you can take are actually in liquid form. That's actually pretty good. Soft gel, liquid form. Those are good ways to take supplements. But the best thing you can do, okay, I think you may or may not have heard this, but they say when you go in the supermarket, avoid the middle aisles. You stay on the outside aisles, because that's where your real food is. In the out, I know I'm probably, but whatever. I do go in the middle aisles once in a while, but you stay on the outside aisles and you actually eat real food, real vegetables and real meat and real seafood. And
so that leads me to two other questions that I'm thinking of right now. I mean, one is, because we've had this conversation before, Linda, about your experiences teaching in either pre-medical school or in medical school. You've been associated with several very prestigious medical colleges over the course of your career. And yet many physicians might only get one course in the impact of nutrition.
They're lucky if they get one course.
And so relying on medical expertise for nutritional information is challenging, because they in fact may not have had the education themselves in order to be able to provide that information to their patients. One of the things that I know I was very impressed with my oncologist very early on is that he made an appointment with me for me to go and sit with a nutritionist who had that expertise, who could really talk to me, but also talk to me about my lifestyle. Because one of the things that we have that is such a challenge in the United States diet is that we also don't have time, right? We're not making the time to prepare foods, right? So getting foods that are less nutritious but more immediately available probably is very typical. I know it's certainly something that I have to kind of reflect on in my own busy world, right? We tend to get, be attracted to more high calorie, less nutritious food when we're hungry, right? And then so skipping meals is not good. And then running a school system, I see the impact of poor quality food and food scarcity in our schools. And it really breaks my heart every day at the end of the day when I'm driving home from work and I see a line at a local fast food restaurant through the drive-through area, because I know many families are in fact kind of using that as a main source of their nutrients. So how do we change this dynamic so that folks are feeling that they have this empowerment, this education to be able to decrease inflammation, improve their immune response, and to do that because it is really going to help with this lifelong experience of life and the potential of getting very serious illness that could impact the quality and duration of that life.
I love this, what you're saying here, Barb. And boy, this is, we, there's so many things, we are, we have a lot of abundance and we're also starving at the same time, right? When we have a lot of things that we can stuff in the mouth, but we're not getting fed. I don't know if that you can kind of see what I'm saying here. When I look at the ingredients on a bag of chips and I go, wow, I got most of this on my lab bench here. I mean, I just, or, it's my chemical cabinet in here. But this is one thing, Barb, that, we can actually ourselves do. It's not something like, you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you what to do. This is actually something we can control. And, it's like, like you say, how can I, it's like we need some kind of massive education. I mean, it should be like right in grammar school. I'm talking to you as a superintendent, but it really is true, Barb, because my med schools, you may get just a couple of hours of a true nutrition course. And part of, and I have to say, this is some of the things, in Europe, how I'm going to talk for Europe for treating cancer. You know, when they, and I was so happy to hear that, you know, your oncologist actually hooked you up with a nutritionist. In Europe, part of their, they do all the things we do, you know, the same standard of care. But diet is part of their therapy. They look at it as therapeutic. It's not like something, oh, you need this to just, you know, get through your day. They actually look at it as therapy. And I don't know, I would, if I could get a hold of people and, you know, from the time they're very little kids, you know, and say, you know, and maybe how we message it needs to be changed. You know, this isn't, you just can't say, you know, if you say to a little kid, Barbie, you had two little kids, right? Two of the most adorable little kids who have grown up to be wonderful kids, you know, but, you know, you were very good, you know, you gave them choices of what to eat, but it was good choices that you gave them. Some people don't have that education. They go by the commercials they see on television. I mean, if we could change even what we market, but you know, uh, like Saturday morning cartoons with all those sugar-loaded cereals and everything that they market, you know, it's like we need some kind of real huge systematic change where, but people right now, today, the people who are listening to this, you have the control. You really do. If you're listening to this, you are already on the path controlling this element of your life. You know, and it's not just about cancer, Barbara. Like with Alzheimer's now, they actually call this the type 3 diabetes. You know, you have type 1, type 2 diabetes, which everybody knows. But there are such strong links now for risk for Alzheimer's is, you know, based in sugar. You know, the refined
inflammation
sugars.
of
Yeah,
refined sugars.
again, Barbara, at the heart of everything, right, is an out of balance inflammatory response, which we can actually partially, I think, really take a hand on it. Is like, you know, what you feed, how you move, what you do, what you think about, you know, we can
Mindset.
actually, yeah, yeah, and I don't, and the mind wellness part is huge. I see this, you know, City of Hope where I am, you know, they take that very, very seriously. They do a lot of you know, of course, the physical wellness, of course, but they really do have, and they're inserting more and more of this, the mental wellness part. Because Barbara, it's all about balance, you know, and we do in our brains. I mean, they've done these incredible experiments in, you know, looking at stress, you know, mental stress on animal systems, you know, and then looking at their inflammatory response markers, and they go off the chart. You know, I talk to my medical colleagues all the time, and I have as you know, I have a very good friend who is a breast cancer surgeon, and she says, you know, Linda, when I get a brand new patient in, I always talk to them, you know, about, of course, about their symptoms and, you know, what's going on. She goes, but I also map out their last 3 years of their lives.
Yes.
And she said, you know, I can't tell. She goes, I can't publish this because it's too woo-woo, but she goes, invariably, there was either a major death in the family, they got divorced, they had a car crash. There, you know, if you map the last three, there was very significant stress events that occurred. That she goes, it's very rare that she has somebody that has not had some kind of traumatic kind of
So,
event.
so Linda, but that's life, right? We know
Yeah,
that
that's life. That's life.
life, there are going to be times in our lives where stress levels are higher because we may be dealing with, illness, an ill family member. We may be dealing with loss of a job, loss of a spouse. All kinds of things happen as part of life. And one of the things we've seen in the work that we do, both in terms of our advocacy through Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition and education, but also through supporting research with our sister organization at the Silent Spring Institute, is that we may not always be able to have control over those external factors, specifically factors that could lead to increased inflammation that are coming from our environment. And we know that some known carcinogens and known agents that lead to disease are higher in prevalence in communities where there is also a higher likelihood of folks having to navigate an increased volume of stressors in their lives, one of which I just mentioned, food scarcity, or living in a food island where there's very little access to healthy, nutritious food. There may be poverty, there may be a higher rate of crime, there may be housing insecurity. All of those are stressors that we know can impact people disproportionately. And they may feel like they don't necessarily have control or opportunity. So yes, some things are within our control, but how do we support work and support communities where they may be feeling like my ability to control my exposure to PFAS in the water, my ability to control my access to products that don't contain chemicals that have been identified as being, part of this group of compounds that have been definitely associated with an increased risk of cancer. And I'm firefighters who, in the course of their work had an inordinate exposure to PFAS, also having an inordinate level of cancer within that profession. So let's have some balance in our conversation here. What are we telling people? Yes, there's things within their control. What can we be doing to help support those folks where there are exposures that are beyond their control?
Yeah, well, the environment one is really hard because you have no control of that, right? If it's part of your job, it's likely people who do airline work, right? They have a higher incidence of cancer as well. There are just definitely some professions that you take those risks on. I mean, you do that. Technically, I'm in the laboratory, right? You can't. So if you are in a profession and I have had the great, because I'm here in wildfire country, I've gotten to know some very fine firefighters. But they tend to, at least by and large, the ones that I've interacted, but then again, maybe it's California, they tend to really take care of themselves. They actually do. They actually are doing their diet. They are doing exercise. Uh, it doesn't mean that totally mitigates their risk. I mean, these things that I'm telling you that you can do totally does not mitigate. I think living is a risk, right? But people who are in environments where they have scarcity, it's hard. It's very hard for them. one thing that, here in my community, and other parts of California, they are making more like food farm markets available. Uh, uh, and that's, they actually just opened one up here in my community. So you actually have real food coming in as that people can have access to. So right here, in a not so a privileged area, they are making farm fresh food available, and usually the prices are way better than going to supermarket. But these are I don't have I don't have the answer. I really don't, because these are societal changes and societal choices that we have to make. Uh, uh, I like to think that potentially we are coming into a time where people are thinking about food, nutrition, inflammation, our air, our water, uh, you microplastics, which are like everywhere. Um, I don't have the answer. I would love it, if one of the people are listening here, if they got some thoughts on, we're just two gals sitting here talking, about what the problems are and potentially how we can personally mitigate some of these things. But these big societal ones, it's a culture, Barb. This is a cultural change that needs to be addressed. You
Mm.
know, I'm watching cancer rates go up. Cancer rates are rising in some instances. We have done great things. We can do all kinds of um, of therapeutic approaches. People are living longer, you know, uh, with cancer. Cancer is not, going to be a total big death thing. It's going to be more treated as a chronic disease. But, we are seeing rises, like, there's a rise in pancreatic cancer that's ongoing. And when they find it now, it tends to be very late stage. What's that about? Where's that coming in? What
Mm.
environmental thing happened here? Um, so, but I do know in the breast cancer community, which is wonderful, there has been such, and I think, and hats off to all the women who fought for these things. There are so many more options for women, uh, you know, in breast cancer and in prevention that, they were not around 20 years ago, that's for sure.
Mm.
So, but I wish I had a wand and I could just wave it and say,
Well,
you
I,
know,
I do believe there's a role. You have been an advocate yourself, and certainly Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition is deeply involved in advocacy, and working very hard to change laws so that we're not continuing to contribute to the degradation of the environment that people are living in, and protecting outcomes with regards to water, air pollution, and certainly education has a major role to play in helping folks to understand. Um, a healthy society is a working society, right? So there's an economic benefit as well, right? So there are aspects of the work and the mission that tie in, directly. Have you what about advocacy work that you have been a part of that, whether locally associated with, living in California? I know that there's some definite needs that you and I have talked about there, but also in your work as a breast cancer researcher.
I was just thinking, um, and where your coalition, there are just, we have so much to do. I mean, anybody on here can participate and actually move the dial. You really can. I mean, the prevention part, better teaching education for starting very young with the little ones, what we feed them, within our homes, teaching, how to and why. You just say, no, you got to eat this, you have to, the why, this is good for you. Why? We need better education just so that people understand that how we move around as biological beings. I'd like to see more people understanding, what's going on inside the cell. When they teach things, it's like, well, this is DNA replication, this is RNA transcription, and everything else. But maybe like make it more connection into real life. This is what, like the person who was asking what's, intracellular inflammation. If we could teach it from that way with young people, that probably, and with lay people, so to speak, since we're in science, right? That might be a better way to educate, as opposed to like, this is the phylum, this is the, the thing.
We do have a tendency to sort and divide, right? Even in our medical profession, we think of the body not as a whole, we think of the body in terms of its parts.
And
right?
actually,
You see the cardiologist for your heart, you see the oncologist for the cancer, which may be very specific. You see a neurologist, you see an endocrinologist. We no longer really think of the living system as a system.
You have hit it here, Barbara. Barb, you have hit it here. And we see more and more of the specialization, right? It was a time when one doctor did it all, from birthing a baby all the way to the end. That doctor was there and they had a real good idea of systems. Whereas now, as you just highlighted, Barbara, everything is so compartmentalized. And very often, and this is where it's kind of where problems come in, one doctor isn't talking to another doctor, and you see mistakes get made clinically because one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing. And sometimes people don't help it. Like a lot of times, like they're even taking things that they don't tell their doctor they're taking, which interact with things that are being prescribed. One of the things I don't like about where we have gone in some aspects of medicine is like take a pill for everything. You got a symptom, here's to take a pill. As opposed to like, let's back it up and maybe try to figure out what is going on. A symptom means there's actually something, we use that word balance a lot in our conversation today, but there's something going on. Just taking a pill for, a headache is one. But if you're taking a pill for this and you're taking a pill for that, and after a while you're like on 6 different pills, there may be one underlying cause, but in a lot of ways, we're not training our clinicians to think in whole systems approach anymore. It's become very specialized, and it's very tied to a therapeutic approach to managing. Everything's about managing symptoms, and as opposed to wellness, right? Making somebody healthy. It's not like it's like, oh, big pharma or something. No, I think
Well,
I don't know what that,
model.
it's almost like a philosophical thing. I need to get, to overarching philosophical.
Well, with that said, Linda, we've come up on the end of our time. And maybe we'll need to have a conversation about, the pharmaceutical approach to wellness as a future webinar. I want to say on behalf of myself, the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition Board, and Cheryl Osimo, MBCC's Executive Director, I want to thank you, Dr. Malkas, for this very informative conversation today. And I want to thank all of our many listeners for joining us. For those interested, the recording of this webinar will be made available later today on the MBCC website at mbcc.org. And if you would like to further support our mission of preventing environmental causes of breast cancer, please consider making a donation by visiting mbcc.org/donate. I appreciate your consideration and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Bye, Barb.
Bye-bye, sister.